Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, which is brought to you by Broadband TV News and, of course, LoCaT as well. Over the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to take a deep dive into the delivery of TV shows into our homes and the cost to our planet. To help us do that, we'll get the full details of a report prepared by Carnstone from Alexandra Fiocco. But first, we're going to hear from LoCaT, the Low Carbon Delivery Project, and Vincent Grivet. Vincent, good afternoon to you. And the floor, or the virtual floor at least, is yours.
Good afternoon, Julian. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much for joining us this afternoon in this LoCaT webinar. I will make a very brief introduction because the real stuff and the interesting things you will hear not from me, but from Alexandro, from Carnstone in a moment. But I would just briefly like to introduce this project and this study so you know what it's about and who it is coming from. The LoCaT study is trying to answer a very simple but maybe a rather important question, which is this one: how green or not green is the delivery of TV content across Europe? And this really becomes a very important question, and you can see on your screen now a couple of press clippings from different sources which indicates that the question is rather high on the agenda on a number of organizations. I would like especially to draw your attention on the publications by Netflix, who probably thought that a reputation of not being very green started to emerge. And
Vincent, sorry to interrupt. Can you just share your slides with?
Oh, sorry, I did not.
So they can take a look.
Absolutely sorry for that. In the clicking of so many buttons, I forgot to. No, it's not this one. Very sorry for that. Though I must say we rehearsed, so I should have known better. Is that okay now?
That looks absolutely fine.
Okay, so here is the clipping that I was started to describe and that you could not see. Very sorry about that. And I wanted maybe to especially point to the clipping from Netflix, where Netflix tried to advocate on the question. And also on the bottom left of the slide, you can see some very interesting reports from the DTG in their recent State of the Nation, where they polled the UK consumers, and it's very striking to see how many of the UK SVOD streaming consumers are concerned about the potential carbon impact of their streaming activities. 40% of them would be prepared to use a lower quality to reduce the emissions, and 49% of them would be prepared to pay slightly more to reduce that carbon impact. So here is the question, here is why it is important. Does this question have easy answer? The answer to this secondary question is no. Also, I certainly want to pay a tribute to the famous work by BBC Research and Development, which studied in an extremely scientific and professional manner the carbon impact of the delivery of the BBC content to the UK audience. And you can see the results here, which I will not comment because now we have other results by Carnstone, which will be presented. But I think this study has been to many people the beginning of the thinking on the carbon impact of TV delivery, with the caveat, of course, that this study was covering only the UK and the BBC, and the question is a broader one. And that is why I had the pleasure to assemble, so to speak, the LoCaT project. Who is the LoCaT project? The LoCaT project is an ad hoc consortium made of a number of constituents by alphabetic order. The first one is ATET. ATET is the gathering of the French DTT TV channels. At this stage, I would like to make one comment because one may think this is a very DTT biased research and report. Well, first of all, Alexandro from Carnstone will prove and testify that this has been a very scientific study. It is not a study with pre-written results. And the other consideration, which I would like to share, because maybe some of you may not be familiar with the French TV landscape, is that all those TV channels, yes, they are on DTT, but about half of their business also happens on the IPTV platform. So they are really balanced companies, I would say. The second constituent or sponsor of the LoCaT project is Broadcast Network Europe. Broadcast Network Europe is the industry association of all broadcast network operators in Europe. Together they cover 20 countries with DTT networks. The third one is ORS, which is specifically the Austrian DTT network operator. The fourth one is Cadre. Cadre is a French technology provider who has a proprietary technology to deliver on-demand content across broadcast network. And you will understand later in the study how relevant such a technology might be. And the fifth and last one is Salto, which is the new streaming platform created in France by TF1, M6, and France Télévisions. So this is the LoCaT project. This is the question we are trying to address. And now I think you only want to hear about the results of this extensive study. As you can see here, the initial talks about that project started in Q1 2020. It took quite a while to assemble the consortium, to define the scope of the study, to contract the study with Countstone, and it took quite a lot of time to Countstone to do this very impressive piece of work. And now we will hear the result from Alexandro. Maybe one last word for you after the webinar. If you want to read more, if you want to reach out, you may connect to the website that you can see here. You will be able to download the report. You will also be able to download it from Broadband TV News, and you can be in touch with the LoCaT project. Alexandro, I think now I have teased the audience. It's up to you now to feed them with the results of the LoCaT study. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Vincent, and thanks, Julian, for the invitation to share today with you the results of the project. Hi, everyone. I'll start sharing my screen. So any moment now, you should be able to see my presentation, but technology being technology, please let me know if you can't.
All good.
Great, excellent. So hi everyone. As Vincent introduced me, my name is Alejandro. I'm a partner manager at Countstone, and I'm here today to, as Vincent mentioned, to explain to you a bit of the background and how we got along with this project, as well as the results. So over the next 20 minutes or so, what I'd like to do is I'll give you a brief introduction so that you know who's developed the study. I'll give you a brief overlook, which you'll be able to find in more detail about the modeling approach that we've taken and the modeling of each specific delivery method. Before we dive into the results, the main results, and also the scenario modeling. So let me start just by saying who we are. So we're Countstone. We're management consultants specializing in sustainability and corporate responsibility. We're based in London with offices in Shanghai also, and we work in a wide range of industries and topics around sustainability. And particularly relevant for this study is that we have quite a good working relationship with the University of Bristol Computer Science Department, with whom we've developed DIMPACT, which some of you might know. And it's thanks to them that we've developed this complex and very solid modeling approach, which I will be presenting ahead, and thanks to their guidance. So before we get started, I'd just like to point out a few details about the modeling approach to keep in mind as we go through. So the first is that to get us in the right in the right track, to remind us what were the objectives of this project. The first objective of which was to understand what were the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the delivery of 1 hour of television content by each of the three delivery methods in scope. So that's digital terrestrial television, DTT, over-the-top television, OTT, and managed IP, Internet Protocol Television, IPTV. That was the first objective. The second objective was then to understand what was the total greenhouse gas emissions caused by the delivery of TV content, both currently, but also in the medium and long terms, which is from 2020 to 2035, which we'll talk about later when we talk about the scenarios. And finally, just also to mention that, as Vincent mentioned, the work that we've done draws heavily on the work completed by the BBC Research and Development in the white paper 372, which is the one you saw before, but also in the white paper from the Carbon Trust, the carbon impact of video streaming. Next, just some small considerations before we get ahead into the real modeling. First one of those is to mention that we did consider as a standard a TV set, a standard TV set, and this was for the purpose of standardizing and making sure that our results are, let's say, more are easier to understand and more comparable with what other studies are doing. But that's not our main focus. Our main focus on what you'll see will be focusing on what comes in the delivery until and excluding the TV set, because we understand also that this why this can be very diverse, and it's not only TV sets. We've got also laptops. We've got tablets, mobile devices, and so on. But that's not been the focus of this study. Also to clarify that when we talk about OTT and IPTV, we focused on fixed line networks. So that's excluding mobile networks, for example. And while the study has not, it doesn't have satellite and cable TV in the scope of the modeling, we do acknowledge their presence when we distribute the viewership in different geographies. Finally, a small note also to keep in mind while we go through the methodology is that the study uses an attributional approach, and this can be easily understood. I won't go into the detail, but this can be easily understood as what's the share of a specific activity in a system, and you'll see you'll get a clear understanding of this when we go through the methodology. And this is the most commonly used and accepted approach in the ICT sector, as opposed to the consequential approach, which is more incremental, which is less mature, less developed. So now going into specifically into the modeling of the different delivery methods. Before we start, I'd like to talk about what's our functional unit, what we would call. And this is what helps us look through a specific lens, the results of the project, and compare it across. And what we've been looking at, and the modeling turns around the energy consumption and the emissions of 1 hour of television, specifically about one device hour of television. And I'll explain this in more detail. So we've used several sources, mainly for the viewership, the European Audiovisual Observatory. And here in this graph, what you can see is the breakdown of what are the different TV viewing types and delivery methods that we can see from the literature. So you'll see, for example, in the linear live TV, we've got DTT, cable, satellite, managed IP delivery methods. But we have also got the broadcast video on demand, VOD. And together, these form the viewing of one of our main sources, the European Audiovisual Observatory. But on top of this, what we added also to account is the subscription video on demand, such as Netflix and Amazon Prime. So you'll see that there's a total viewership which we've split into what in each geography is, let's say, the distribution. But these bars that you can see, these blue bars, are let's say the viewing hours per capita, let's say. But for the purpose of the study, and when we talk about energy, we need to acknowledge that in households, especially in households that are more than one member households, usually TV is not watched by one single person, but it's shared. So we account for this, and that's how we define the device hours of TV. That could be translated easily as how many hours that a TV has been turned on. So that's on the modeling, and then I'll go into each specific type. So for example, here we've got digital terrestrial television, and here I've tried to simplify the methodology. And what you'll see here on the right is these three main boxes, which represent the three different stages of the delivery method. We've got, and this will repeat across the different delivery methods. We've got here the distribution infrastructure, the in-home network interface, and the viewing peripherals. So for example, in the case of DTT, the distribution infrastructure is the broadcast distribution infrastructure. In terms of in-home network interface, we've got the terrestrial aerial amplifier. And in terms of viewing peripherals, we've got set-top boxes, could be simple, could be complex, and the home caching device, which is something that we'll explain for one of the scenarios. Under each box, what you'll see is what we consider the key parameters. So you'll see, for example, that for the viewing peripherals, the standby time and power, as well as the percentage of households that have them, are let's say, key drivers of the impact. And finally, on the left-hand side, what you'll see is, and that's possibly jumping a bit ahead of the results, is what we see that each of these portion of the delivery method represents out of the total impact. So here for DTT, for example, we can see that over half of it, 55%, is in the viewing peripherals. Apologies, that's the wrong coloring for some reason. So it's 55% is in the viewing peripherals. So that's the simple complex set-top box. Then if we go to the over the top, for over the top, we can see a very similar picture. So that for the distribution infrastructure, and here we account for the cloud infrastructure, the backend services, and the CDN, the core network. A main driver is the bitrate of the content. The bitrate of the content will demand how much stress that will put on let's say on the infrastructure, and that's how we attribute it. Then in terms of in-home network interface, we've got the access network and the customer premises equipment, which you could think of a router, for example, for the Wi-Fi. And main drivers of this are the data consumption. So we here take a ratio of what's the data consumption of the TV watched against the per capita, the total data consumption watched, to attribute what's the, let's say, out of the 24 hours that a router is on, how many of those hours can be attributed to watching TV. And similarly for viewing peripherals, in which we have IP-enabled set-top boxes, streaming devices, and game consoles. Finally, we've got the managed IPTV. It's very similar to OTT, but in this particular case, there's a few distinctions to consider. The main distinction is that in terms of viewing peripherals, you'll have seen that OTT contained a wider range, but frequently, most commonly, IPTV will require a specific set-top box for the system. So that's a consideration to be had. So with that in mind, we can go to the results, which is what you'll be expecting to see. So the first thing that I'd like to show is these are the main figures. These are the figures of, on the top, you can see what's the energy in watt hours per device hour per different delivery methods across geographies. So you can see, for example, that for the EU28, we can see that for DTT, each device hour of TV consumes 14 watt hours. For OTT, it's around 109 watt hours. And for managed IPTV, that's around 153 watt hours. And you'll see, just looking at the graph on top, that although they are mostly aligned, there are some differences. And these differences, so for example, if you look at Austria, Sweden, in terms of the DTT consumption, these differences are mainly driven by specific factors of the country, such as geography and those kind of distributions. So that's in terms of the watt hours, which in general lines you can see looks fairly homogeneous. But when we then look at the emissions per device hour of TV viewing, you can see that the picture looks quite different. And this is because here we factor in the different energy network intensities. So we can see a country, for example, like Sweden, which are a very clean grid. It really diminishes the impact when we compare it to the average EU28 figure. So these are the main results. I'll leave it there for a few seconds so that you can get a good view before I move on to the next slide. And while you're having a look at these results, and of course we can come back at any point, one of the things that I wanted to point out is that in the study we were very thorough in seeing, in checking the figures, and also in comparing it to, let's say, to what other widely accepted studies were obtaining as results, and we can say satisfactorily that it's fairly aligned, which gives us a very good confidence in the results. And you will be able to find more detail on this in the full report. Great. So then I'll move on to the next slide, also on results. And I wanted to bring this up. And here you can see, apologies for the error in the color in the previous slide, but here you can see more clearly the distribution of where the energy consumption is located for different delivery methods, for DTT, OTT, and IPTV. And you can see different components of the system. So for example, for DTT, if we look at the figure until before excluding TV, of course, if we include the TV is the largest chunk of the energy consumption. But if we exclude the TV, we can see that 7.6 out of the 13.8 are attributed to the broadcast infrastructure. Then for the case of Europe, for OTT, we can see that OTT, yes, TV is still quite significant, and the peripherals are still a big portion. But in this case, the access networks and the customer premises equipment are a very significant portion of the emissions, which is very similar to IPTV. Great. So now I'll briefly talk about the scenario modeling. And just as an introduction to this, in the scenario modeling, what we have modeled, this is a scenario modeling and not a, let's say, not a forecast. So we've laid a clear set of assumptions based on which we've modeled the energy consumption and the greenhouse gas emissions for the years 2025, 2030, and 2035. And the results, which you can see now on the screen, here in this graph, here on this graph, you will see the variations against what we call our baseline scenario. We've got our scenario A, which is our baseline scenario, which considers some IPTV growth based on current trends. That's what we consider the zero scenario A. Then we've got a scenario B, which you can see on the graph on the right with that pink color, which considers an increased rate of IPTV growth. We've got also our scenario C, which considers that ITP growth will plateau and then DTT will regrow. And finally, we've got scenario D, which considers that DTT home caching will be present for video on demand. And what we can see on the graph on the right is that based on the variation against the current trend scenario, scenario B has a 5.2% higher energy consumption in 2035. Scenario C, 5.1% lower energy consumption, and scenario D, and 9.2% lower energy consumption. So those were the results, and some final thoughts, just mirroring what you can find in the full report, is that first of all, we found that through our modeling, TTT energy consumption was lower for OTT and IPTV across the geographies, and this is true 2020 and in most future scenarios. As I said, yes, this is something that we've seen across geographies. And one thing that's worth highlighting is that while this pattern is the case across all countries, the reduction in emissions is most pronounced in countries with higher DTT penetration. So those are the key findings. So and now I'll give control back to Julian and Vincent, and happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandra. If anybody does want to pose a question, there's a little Q&A box, which you can probably see towards the right of the little bar at the bottom. If you could use that, please. I know there's a question I noticed just popped in the chat. I'll give that one anyway. But the Q&A box towards bottom right is the best place to put your questions. Quickly mention a couple of other things as well. There will be a full recording made of it. We are making a full recording of this webinar, and we can give you the opportunity to watch and to listen to that in a day or so's time. And obviously, of course, you can download, as Vincent mentioned earlier on, a copy of the report, both from LoCaT and from the Broadband TV News websites as well. I'm wondering, Alexandra, you're coming at this from a perspective of somebody, I guess, who on a day-to-day basis, you don't have too much to do with the TV industry other than maybe watching the occasional show from time to time. Did you think that enabled you to look at this with fresh eyes, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and absolutely. So as someone, so we were very familiar with, let's say, the whole TV industry as Cornerstone. As personally, it's something that is, let's say, when I started the LoCaT project, something that I had some knowledge of, but I was not, let's say, an expert on the topic. So seeing this through a different eye, and also hearing all the advice from our advisors at the University of Bristol has been really, really interesting. And I think that the results and the way that we've got to the results really give a very, very interesting view of what the landscape is at the moment, and of course in the scenarios.
And have you done this with any other industries at all?
Yeah, we tend to work very closely with other industries in terms of estimating their energy consumption and so on, and of course working in setting targets, greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So yeah, we're fairly familiar with this, but it's been really, really interesting to work with Vincent and the whole LoCaT team and the University of Bristol in this project.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions coming in, so I should probably get to some of these. Just quickly wanted to ask something in connection, really, you didn't really include cable or satellite television in all of this. I know it's kind of difficult to say, and Vincent was able to show us the BBC slide earlier on. But I'm wondering, is it easy to compare, say, cable with a managed IPTV system? Was there enough different technologies so that we can't make that comparison?
Well, I'd say that the comparison can be made. It was not within the scope of the LoCaT study. The comparison can be made. I would say at DTT and cable, you could look at them also through a similar lens in terms of the modeling perspective. The results from the LoCaT study we can't really comment because we haven't really looked into that. But the LoCaT study, which is based, has a lot of input from that work done by the BBC research and development team, which did look at cable TV and satellite. So I would encourage anyone interested in seeing how cable and satellite would fit within this picture to read that study to get a sense of how this might play out.
Okay, that's useful to know. Let me go through some of the questions then. And Vincent, if you want to come in on any of these as well, please do so.
Maybe if I may, Julian, I will
go ahead.
One very quick word on the last question about satellite and cable. And I would like to clarify that also the LoCaT study has not specifically assessed the energy and carbon impact of satellite and cable. We have not ignored the existence of cable and satellite. In other words, in the 100% of the TV hours which people are watching in any given country, we have absolutely acknowledged the true share of those hours on cable and satellite. So whether efficient or not efficient, cable and satellite hours have not been counted as being DTT or IPTV or OTT hours. That's maybe useful to clarify.
Yeah,
and just picking up on one of the questions here, because it's relevant to that, Albrecht Kuhn has asked, well, he suggests it would have been interesting to model cable and satellite as well. Was there a particular reason why you decided just to keep to DTT against OTT and IPTV in the study?
I think probably I can take this one, Alexandro.
Yeah.
It's out of realism, I would say. In the initial brief of the study, cable and satellite were included. And when we considered proposal from respondents to our RFP, including Countstone, we realized how heavy and complex the study would be. And we decided that at least in the first phase, we should focus on a limited number of platforms. And DTT, OTT, and IPTV have been selected as being the most, I would say, universal and present platforms across Europe. Certainly, it would be relevant to consider especially satellite, which has a kind of stable room in the market. Cable is a little bit more disputable because cable is changing so much. And in many countries, cable now looks like very much IPTV.
Okay, right. Let's go through some of these questions, shall we? Alex Buchan asks, how is this data going to be used? For example, will it provide content providers with advice on the best way to both create and distribute their content?
Maybe that's a question for Vincent.
Yeah, I think it's probably up to any reader of the study to draw its own conclusion. And even within the LoCaT consortium, if you will, maybe not necessarily every sponsor of the project will take home the same conclusions. Having said that, and again, I would encourage all organizations who are listening to the study to become familiar with the study and potentially to propose the conclusions that they would like to draw. Nevertheless, I think that what we can derive from the study, which seems pretty obvious, is that DTT in all countries and in all years, if I can say, so as much today as in 15 years, seems to have such a significant advantage from a carbon point of view over OTT and IPTV that it may seem relevant to consider scenarios where DTT is used as much as possible, especially, of course, for the linear television. And then when it comes to non-linear television, which basically is on demand, certainly the study will not pretend that on-demand TV viewing should be made prohibited and against the law because it generates more carbon. That would, of course, not be the conclusion. But it seems to, it's the conclusion, the study seems to suggest that as for on-demand viewing, OTT might be slightly better than IPTV, which suggests that maybe DTT plus OTT is a kind of optimal combination that should be privileged. But that is not necessarily the unique or the single conclusion of the study. And again, I would like to encourage all listening experts, people, and organizations to look for their own conclusions. And very frankly, from the point of view of the LoCaT consortium, we are absolutely happy to start a debate on that. We are happy to contribute the study and we're happy to start a debate.
And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm thinking you only have to turn on to any of the terrestrial channels and they're forever telling you to visit, be it the iPlayer on the BBC or My TF1 in France. They're telling you to go off to these services and download things rather than continue to always watch the linear transmission. Something which kind of fits in with this, an anonymous question, doesn't matter too much, I guess, is that I guess most consumers have a mix of OTT and DTT or other equipment, and that they mix and match what they do. Does that affect the results in any way? And people, I guess in my house here, you know, I've got 3 television sets and they're connected to different things.
No, that's correct, and we have, of course, being mindful of that in the study. It does not affect the results as what that's one of the benefits of the study being modeled by, let's say, that device hour. So it's an hour of TV watched specifically for this distribution method. But the study does acknowledge that in a way that when we consider, for example, the allocation of the energy consumption of some devices, such as, for example, the rotors, that allocation is split between OTT and IPTV. So we don't consider that, let's say, the energy consumption for OTT and for IPTV takes the same proportion. So they both are acknowledged that there's something else using that device, or same thing for set-top boxes that might have some internet capability that might be used for DTT purposes, but might also have some capabilities to be used for watching OTT in some cases. So the study is it acknowledges that and considers that in the modeling.
Okay, Frank Fisher asks, on sheet 14, I think this is of your slides, Alexandro, there are large differences in energy consumption, but how can this be if the TV itself is always representing between about 20 and 25% of total consumption? I don't know if it helps, if it's easy to put that slide up again, or if there's a straightforward answer we can give Frank on that.
Slide 14. Yeah, I can share it just to.
If I may, Alexandro, I think the answer indeed is very easy, because that slide 14 that you will show in a moment is excluding the TV. And this is why there are big impacts. Generally speaking, the study is excluding the TV set itself. And only in one occurrence, we have accounted for the TV set as an indication, but generally the study is focusing on the delivery, excluding the TV set.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So these figures exclude that. We have considered in the study that the TV set, as a matter of comparing the figures across 2 other studies, for example. But the main figures that we look at, for example, here, do you consider the TV sets? Now that I guess brings a good question in terms of if it's energy consumption, why are there differences between one country and the other? And that's because let's remember that this study also accounts for the standby energy consumption of devices. So even if the TV would be included, there would be some minor differences, not significant. But yes, Vincent is absolutely right. That is explained by this being excluding the TV set.
Just out of interest, if we see the full report, which I know we've mentioned a few times, people can download from Broadband TV News or from LoCaT. Are there details of the other countries within the survey, or is it just with those we see on screen here?
There's more details, especially in the annex. So yeah. I'd invite anyone interested to have a look.
No, it's interesting. Frank, for example, actually in the follow-up question says that in the Netherlands, there's almost linear distribution on DTT is almost non-existent. I think it's a very basic DTT system in the Netherlands. The reason for that, of course, is that historically so many people have had cable, and of course now some of them are getting IPTV as well, and have done in recent years. Now, Mark Fabish asks, my question, he says, is about the allocation of emissions of in-home network interfaces for OTT. A voucher runs 24/7 for various applications like a phone, and energy consumption is rather flat and dependent on usage. Why did you decide to allocate energy consumption per GB, per gigabit, and not time?
Yeah, that's correct. It's based on so it's a very flat consumption. It is in the way we modeled. It's let's say we take a watt-hour figure, so it is fixed. What does happen is that it varies because we allocate it based on, let's say, we know in a home, not the router is not only used to let's say watch TV. It's used for other purposes. So that's why we
know that streaming takes up quite a bit. I think
exactly.
I think it's like some 75% from some studies.
Yeah, that's correct. I believe you must be quoting the Cisco report, possibly, but yeah, it's around that figure. So we do consider that allocation method and in different geographies, of course, it's different depending on what's the typical data consumption in different countries, and we account for that. But that's the allocation that we do. But let's say the energy consumption of the device, that's in that particular case, that's fixed.
And have you taken in an interesting follow-up from Mark, actually, to his question? Did you consider the evolution of renewable energy in Europe and how that might change future scenarios? I'm thinking myself, as I'm lucky in the UK to be with one of the very few electricity companies still in business, and they've sent me they've moved me to some green plan. So that presumably means that, well, hopefully, whatever I burn is going to have less of an effect on the planet, although I still think using less might be the simplest way of dealing with that.
Yeah, no, so that's a good question, and that's something that is addressed in the report. So yes, so the report doesn't let's say doesn't consider that in the modeling necessarily, because we are modeling this in a country level, and that's much harder to predict than, for example, knowing that a specific company has their servers running on renewable electricity, and we are aware that's very frequent in the ICT sector. But of course, that's one of the caveats that the study needs to be considered with.
Okay, quick answer.
If I may, Julian, briefly comment on what Alexandro said. I think, out of memory, generally speaking, the study for the 2035 outlook scenarios is loyal to the generally accepted forecast for the big decrease in carbon associated to 1 kilowatt hour in Europe, because out of memory, I think this is supposed to be reduced by a factor of 6 in the next 15 years. which is a huge progress. And that progress is reflected in the study. Of course, if that progress is not achieved, the study will not be correct. I think the study is probably reasonably accurate in its forecast and robust in the forecasting in energy, but then the transformation of energy into carbon is totally not within the reach of Cornerstone and the LoCaT study. I mean, it's really a matter of which decisions the individual countries and electricity producers make.
Yeah.
And I would say generally the current view is a rather optimistic one, and one may ask how this will be achieved.
Yeah, actually, and just to complement on that, and also to possibly clarify a bit what I said. So what we don't do is we don't take into account, let's say, saying that one particular server runs completely renewable energy, but as Vincent said, we do consider that there's a widely accepted greening of the grid that you could consider across Europe based on the European Energy Agency, and we do, let's say, account for that in our modeling in a very, let's say, in a very conservative way, which has also been checked by project sponsors.
Very quickly to this one, Werner Poltz asks, why is the energy consumption in Austria higher? That might actually be related to sorts to your last answer.
Yeah, and I believe that question particularly is talking about DTT, and that's let's say a specific case, as I mentioned, due to geography. So the amount of transmitters and those kind of factors influence how much energy a country might consume in their let's say on the infrastructure end, while at home it might be very similar. There might be some variations, but the country's geography, and that's our hypothesis, is what drives these differences.
Okay. And if I may complement that slightly,
please do.
I think in the particular case of Austria, the DTT usage is rather low, which means that quite a few people and a small number of hours have to pay together the total energy consumption of the DTT network, and it results in this rather high, compared to other countries, energy impact of DTT versus other countries.
Okay. Simon Panau asks, how did you take into account the mix of DTT transmission from large transmitters to city centers and small relay sites to rural areas?
So that's I would one of the things I would say is that has been taken, let's say, on a higher level view, getting some direct data from project sponsors, but we've also to model all the different geographies, we've applied let's say a very good proxy estimation based on these first source data. We've in that specific sense, we haven't gone as granular as going into each specific into the specifics of the distribution infrastructure in that sense, but we have good very good data in there.
But yeah, maybe to complement what Alexandro said, I would say that the smaller transmitters are indirectly factored into the study, because as Alexandro explained, Cornerstone worked with a kind of total energy bill for DTT per country. And in this energy bill, the big transmitters and the small transmitter were included. Also, they were not distinguished. It was like one big number. And maybe a second element of or answer to the question is that in the end, even if there would be a significant mistake made on that aspect, it would only marginally affect the study, because in DTT, the impact of the DTT network itself, the transmitters, is very small. And the DTT, the energy used in the DTT scenario is mostly or predominantly the energy used by the in-home amplifiers and set-top box. So that if, for instance, the DTT network energy would have to be multiplied by 2 or by 3, the general outlook of the study would not change so much.
Okay. John Krieger, my Broadband TV News colleague, asks, in the overall context, have you considered in your calculations and conclusions that DTT only plays a marginal role in many European countries? We mentioned the Netherlands earlier, of course. There are others to be considered. This might be an environmentally friendly TV distribution method, but most people don't actually use it.
From the modeling perspective, and I'm sure Vincent will be able to comment more, but from the modeling perspective, we've been very detailed in getting, let's say, in breaking the viewership and breaking the total hours of TV watched by different TV methods. And we've done that per country. So let's say, we've taken into account that in some countries, DTT or other methods might have a much lower penetration than in others. So that's been factored in. But I don't know, Vincent, if you want to comment more on that.
I think from a methodology point of view, what you said is absolutely correct, which means that the small market share of DTT in certain countries is a factor in the study. And as we said, in the case of Austria, it's a factor that makes DTT less attractive in those countries. It remains attractive in absolute terms, but it's less attractive than in countries where it has a big market share. And maybe the second element of answer to the question, which is more prospective, is that maybe DTT is not very used now, but maybe the study can bring some modification in the future. And if there is an awareness that a DTT platform is there, available, and delivering signal, maybe there can be an appeal of people or companies to promote the usage of DTT, even the more, and that is the D scenario on which we did not spend a lot of time, which is a prospective scenario, but it is a scenario where you can predict or propose, maybe propose is a better word, you can propose that some part of the on-demand content is delivered through DTT. And then if you can achieve that, it would make DTT appealing again, even in those countries where the usage of DTT has been very low. By the way, and also it's probably not associated with the climate and carbon considerations, I think we should not forget that in the United States, over the last maybe 6 or 10 years, the market share of DTT has considerably grown again. And that's totally independent of carbon and LoCaT, but there have been other reasons why people suddenly realized that maybe in the end, getting TV from their rooftop antenna was a good idea.
I suppose if all you're doing is watching your local NBC affiliate and Netflix, then actually all of a sudden DTT becomes quite a good option. Couple of questions for me, maybe before we finish. I'm wondering for both of you, really, and Vincent, I'll start with you. When you look through this report as a whole, were there any conclusions which it drew that you found surprising in any way?
Yeah, I must say that I've been a little bit surprised, like many people, that the difference between, on one side, DTT and IP-based technology on the other side were so big. And the second surprise is the one I briefly mentioned a moment ago, is that most of the energy consumption happens very close to the homes of the people, in the kind of in-home cabling and equipment, and the kind of wide area network in all scenarios is a limited contributor to the overall energy consumption. That was a surprise.
Yeah, that's interesting. We did have it was a question of sorts, but Kevin Lewis observes that TVs are the largest contributor to the consumption of energy in many cases, and particularly when we're always viewing this on increasingly larger screens, even in our small European houses. Alexandro, do you have any sort of things which jumped out of you as you sort of reached your conclusions on this report?
I think one of the things that I want to possibly stress on is the, let's say, the solid methodology and the results that the model has come to, which we've seen over and over through our variations and several iterations, coming at a very similar results, which give us very good confidence on the results. And it's really interesting to see that how different networks really differ in their approach, and how even when we see these big differences between geographies, we can see a very similar trend. So we can see the same picture repeating over and over and across different geographies, with their differences and everything, but still.
Right, that's good. And thank you, Alexandro. Let's bring things up, I guess, to a close now. Thank you very much to both of you. And a reminder, of course, that the report in detail can be downloaded. Links on the Broadband TV News website and on the LoCaT site to take a look at that. Vincent, I don't know if you want a final word here to wrap things up.
No, I think I would like to thank all the people whom I cannot see, unfortunately, but who have taken the time to attend the webinar. And I really hope that they found it interesting. And I would like also to thank Alexandro and the Carnson's team, because it's been really a lot of work. It was super complex, probably of a higher complexity than all of us thought initially. But I think, as Alexandro said, in the end, the study has been completed, and it's been completed with a very high level of professionalism. So I hope everybody finds it's an interesting piece in this thinking process.
Okay, well, thank you very much to you, Vincent, also to Alexandro for the study and for the presentation this afternoon. We had a few people who came in late. Don't worry, you can get a recording a little later on of this webinar, but I will wish everyone now, it's getting dark outside here, even in the UK, so I wish you a very good afternoon. Maybe I should be wishing you a very good evening. Thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us today.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.